Okay.
Not everybody can deal with that, no matter how much training you have. Did you have to weed some people out?
Well, of course there were people who were weeded out, and some said no. If somebody in asking, like I have my buddies that I'm still associated with. Those of us who are still around, alive and active, and are still close. A lot of them, I wasn't gonna go to them and say, "We need you to know," because I knew what they'd be said. No way, you know. And so that would have. We had to think of the bigger picture, and it got to the point where it was not about us. It was about what is to come. It was correcting it for our children, those who would come behind us, and so forth. It was not about what would happen to us personally, and that was why you had to be able to sort of get in the true spirit of nonviolence, and you could not be afraid. We'd all be afraid, not knowing what to expect. Remember, we're living in a time of the Ku Klux Klan and the lynchings and so forth. And in Stone Mountain, Georgia, right, it was a symbol of the Ku Klux Klan, where they had their rallies and meetings, people murdered and this kind of thing. So it was not about being afraid, and I hope I can get a chance to tell you about exactly what happened at the first demonstration for me personally.
Tell me about that first.
And so when after we had broken up into the 9 groups to go to the federally supported restaurants and facilities, the train stations, the Union Station, the terminal stations, the Capitol area, City Hall area, etc., where it should have been open to all the public, not private institutions. So that when I was assigned with my group, and there was a single leader to each group, a spokesperson. And my group went to down in the area of the Union Station. And the Union Station was right in the area where the Atlanta Journal building was. And so that when we went in, this was the perfect timing. We had scouted out when the restaurants would be free, or when we would not cause a commotion, but that we would not. They couldn't say that we caused a big commotion that that regular customers couldn't come in. So about 11:20, we were moving in between 11:20 and 11:30. We were moving into these 9 chosen places, and we sat down. All of us were dressed neatly. But we wore ties and jackets, and the boys did, and the young women wore that. They were dressed nicely, and there was no one in pants, suits. Then you wouldn't have worn. Women didn't wear pants and all of that. They were with dresses and skirts, and most of us carried a book or some little case or something, and we went and we sat down. And so what happened to me was, and the reality of the whole thing was, when we walked in and sat down in the restaurant in the area where I went, the waitress came. There was a bar. It was really like a soda fountain in those days. There was a bunch of white men sitting along at the soda fountain. So we went to sit down in these little booths that were in the tables there, and it was right on there was glass all along there, so you could be seen out in the street. So when I sat down, people, they just all turned around and looked, and the waitress, there was some conversation back there with one man with an apron and some other things. So this young woman came over and snatched up the napkins and the plastic silver off the table and salt, just snatched it all up. And so it was in that moment for me personally that I understood what this thing was all about. And all the fear and everything just flew out the door. And it became a spiritual encounter. Because I said, now here we are. And this is what this is about. I just said to myself, they're going to snatch up what have we done? We sat down, supposedly as free American citizens, and to sit down, and they'll snatch up the silver and all this. June Gary Hobbs was one of my the leader, each leader sort of was responsible for his people, his or her people at that time, and the idea was that we would be one spokesman. Everybody wouldn't just start talking, and so they kept coming. They wouldn't say anything, and so I guess it was. I don't remember exactly how it was directed to me. I sat in the front along the side, the others behind me. But so when he came over and they said, well, you know, we can't serve you here. And they said, what, you know, you can't come in here. So I said, sir, we intend to sit here until we are served or until we are told why we can't be served. And this is recorded in the newspapers. And then we saw it like we sat there another 20 or 30 minutes. It actually wasn't that long. It might have been within that time. But outside, people began to gather in the streets, and I mean, it was outside, big box cameras, people making pictures and all this in the windows, and police were outside, and finally we saw this big paddy wagon, police wagon, black wagon, drive up and park right there on the side outside of the restaurant. And we could see everything that was transpiring. And so when the police, this big red police officer walked up, they were always like that, you know, in the South, the big. So he walked up with this man, and he said, "This is Mr. Teague, the manager of the restaurant." And he says that you can't be served here. So I said, "Sir, we intend to sit here until we are served or to be told why we can't be served." And this is a big red Southern cop. And I'm not a Negro, but by that time out, you know what I was. Anyway, so what we all were. And that was the thing that really, I'll never forget that moment. And I understood so much because we had done nothing wrong. And so as far as them taking a club and knocking us over the head, personally, I had no fear. And I don't think the rest of, I mean, I don't think we couldn't have been there if we were afraid at that point. And so they said, okay, so stand up. And they started to escort us out through the doorway and into the streets and around to the back. I remember helping June Gary Hops up into that paddy wagon, and she has told us herself. You know, how I tried to look after she and the others, and Lucille was in my group. Lucille Brown McIver, whom she was Lucille Brown. Then of course we were all at Catholic school together, and so. At that, the next thing I knew to make a long story to bring that particular event to a close. That evening, we were sitting. Some of us we were in cell blocks, you know, big cell blocks, and I saw Martin Luther King Sr., Reverend King Sr., coming up to the outside with the man and two police officers, and he was looking in. He saw me, and he looked around and saw A.D., his son, and some others he knew, and he was just smiling. That was his personality. Is say, "I'm proud of you," and so he said, well, I'm going. He was making bonds for some of us to get out, and he said, this is my property bond. He told me, they knew this was a property bond, and the bondsman was there with him, and so he said, I will sign a bond for A.D. King, Otis Moss, Albert Brinson. Now, if I can take any more, you let me know how many. With this house, the property bond, and that was the night that after that we went through all this process, and we'd gone through all the normal things from the arrest, and when we were released, we didn't have cars or anything, you know, and so. It was a big uproar. I mean, it's all over the news, you know. I got on the bus, the 17 Main Decatur bus, to go back down toward the projects that night, and where I lived in Greater Homes Public Housing Project. And so when I got on the bus, all these folk riding home, the white folk were standing up, holding on straps, and the trolley was crowded. And they were looking at newspapers and all. So I got on and went on back to the back, just to stand up. And as I turned around and stood there, I looked at the paper. Everybody was holding up the pink edition of the 5-star final Atlanta Journal. And on the front page, Negroes sit in downtown in Atlanta. And I looked at it, and that was my picture on the front of the page. And showing me being the man talking to me. This showed a big picture of my face there. And the other part of it showed, I think June, as I was trying to get up into the van. And so I just sort of kind of held my head down, and I reached up and pulled the cord, and just, I didn't go but one stop. And I got off of that bus and walked out the rest of the way home, looking around. But that was something I would never forget,
How long ago was that, and it still touches you? Why?
It was March the 15th, I think. The first actual sit-in of the student movement, 1960. And I just said, at this stage of life, you look back, gosh, I've been through so many experiences after that, but that was the first major one that I felt that I was participating in something that would help others. And that I knew that it wasn't about me. I didn't want to be seen or photographed or anything, but it was just a part of the group.
As the group evolved, you developed a hierarchy, and you told me something on the phone that I just found amazing, that basically you had leaders, but that there were non-voting positions.
Well, in the planning of the actual march, which grew out of the publication of the appeal, and the name was the Appeal for Human Rights Committee.
Wait a second.
Okay.
Hi there. Okay, we'll be right in about 2 to 4 minutes.
We've got another meeting session.
Okay, let me wrap up. Thank you.
Okay.
We're gonna finish the story.
Okay.
You finish it the way you need to finish it.
Okay. And what I'm saying is, I would really like it to be understood that there were, it was more a group thing, and that was done purposely because we knew that there were dangers, and most of us were not interested at all in necessarily having our names up or being the leaders of things. I mean, it was about us. And so we had a non-voting chairman, and that was Lonnie King. So if there were issues to be decided, the group, the small and inner group, the planning did that. And that was pretty much the way it was intended.
Okay, what we have to do is tear down.
Okay.
Still haven't gotten to June